Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest and greatest episode of Failing Up. I'm your host, Claire, and today I'm sitting with Kian, who is the founder and CEO of Nucleus. Nucleus is creating a doctor in your pocket, starting with genetic testing. In this episode, we cover everything regarding the pitfalls and the failures of the existing American healthcare system and infrastructure, as well as what the future will look like for American healthcare in 100 years. Will we have AI doctors? Will we have humanoid doctors? We dive into it in this episode. Kian, how are you? It's so nice of you to make it out here.
Absolutely. Wait, we're actually rolling now, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. You guys can't tell.
How are you? How's everything?
I'm great. I'm doing really great. I'm a lot going on. It's the end of the year. It's kind of a sprint for me, the company, but we're doing great, honestly.
Okay, amazing. So I just want to start by asking, what got you so passionate about DNA testing? I know you came from two parents who were doctors. Tell me more about what that experience was like growing up.
Yeah, so I'm a first-generation American. Both my parents are Persian. They actually escaped Iran during the revolution. The government of Iran was trying to literally murder my dad, and so he escaped the country. Eventually ended up in America. He kind of has the proverbial story of someone, flipping hamburgers in McDonald's literally to becoming a doctor. He's actually an ophthalmologist, an eye surgeon. And eventually, they moved to Brooklyn. I grew up in Brooklyn, not too far. And, I think the story of Nucleus begins very unfortunately with a personal tragedy. My cousin actually went to sleep one night. She didn't wake up the next day. She died in her sleep. She had a condition that basically can cause irregular heartbeating and sudden death. And there's actually no phenotypic signal. If you know you have this genetic marker, you can give someone something called a beta blocker, which can reduce the risk 10x. But we didn't know. This kind of got me very interested in genetics, and I started actually kind of diving deeper and deeper into it. One of the first kind of forays into it was me thinking about how actually, disease isn't really an inherent property of human beings, but can be more viewed as a problem to be solved. If you could actually, correct for, an error in someone's DNA, you could, cure a disease. So I actually joined one of the first do-it-yourself gene laboratories in the country. And there, we engineered yeast to make the lemonades. We edited bacteria to make them resistant to antibiotics. And I started thinking about I love the beauty and depthness of biology, but I want to combine it with the iterability of programming, right? And work at that intersection of bits and atoms. Went to Penn, so studied computational biology, which is kind of, genetics, programming, statistics. And I was literally in, Bio 221 class. And, the chairman of the biology department brought up what is my favorite chart in the world, which is the decreasing cost of sequencing an entire human genome, right? What used to be, around 100 million, even $1 billion at some point per sample, in 2020 was literally around $1,000 per sample, an exponential decrease on a logarithmic scale. And I thought to myself, how is it possible, first off, how did this even happen? Second off, wow, this price is obviously going to go towards zero, right? It's an inevitability, $100 million to $1,000. It's going to go to probably negligible, a couple dollars per sample to sequencing an entire human genome, which, just for reference, everyone has DNA. DNA is the blueprint of who we are. If you can imagine your DNA is like a 1,000-page book. Old genetic tests will look at 1 page, 2 page, maybe 10 pages. We look at all 1,000 pages, right? That's what's not possible. So I thought to myself, okay, I have to go build this kind of application layer for DNA. Dropped out of school, moved back to Brooklyn, and let's just say I got to work.
Amazing. Wow, that's an incredible story. And so you said your dad was
ophthalmologist, eye doctor.
Yes, but he came from Iran, correct?
Yes, both my mom and dad are from Iran.
So what are some of the key lessons that you've learned from the relationship with him and what he's taught you based on his experiences that you've applied to your life today?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of adversity, right? I mean, when you're immigrants, this is kind of shared, whether you're from, Iran or India or any other country, it doesn't really matter. The reality is that life is very hard and sort of even there's so many things today that, we take for granted, right? Freedom of speech is obviously one. The fact that we can go on Twitter and say, literally whatever we want, that's actually a supreme luxury. There's very much a topic of that in the United States today on freedom of speech. Obviously, it's important. We should continue to, quote unquote, invest in freedom of speech. But it's very much the case that if you even speak badly about the government in other countries, it can put you in a very extremely risky position. That's not with my father, for example. So I think what happens is I like to say you combine the almost immigrant energy and kind of passion and persistence and relentlessness with the opportunity in America, right? So you have someone who escapes a country, comes to America by himself. This is someone who, I like to say that there's little microcosms of life. So like, if you play like a video game with someone, or, if you play some sort of like tennis match or whatever, soccer match, whatever it is with someone, you can get almost a sense of who they are in their kind of in every sense. It's like the old, adage, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And one thing I always think about my father, one of my most kind of fond memories is playing any sport with him, right? And I think it's a perfect encapsulation of his spirit. He just does not freaking quit. I mean, the man will like throw his entire body on the line to win a point in tennis, right? And I still beat him, for the record. But you know what I'm saying? And so I feel like, and then I take that and I imagine that, except the difference is you're in a country that actually encourages innovation, encourages speaking your mind, encourages following your bliss. You combine those two things and it's magic.
That's a beautiful response. So speaking of America, I'd like to dive into a really hot topic, especially right now at the moment, the American healthcare system.
Yeah.
So I believe it was back in the 70s, the expenditure to life expectancy was similar across like Western countries. And since then, the U.S. has progressed this way and all the other countries have progressed this way. And our spending is now like $12,444, I believe, as of today I checked. But why do you think the trend for the U.S. is progressing in the wrong direction while all the other countries, it seems to be progressing in the right one?
Yeah, I mean, you make a lot of salient points. Well, we basically have the highest per capita spending in healthcare and the worst outcomes out of any other kind of developed nation, which is extremely concerning. We spend around $4 trillion a year on healthcare, which is, I mean, I always like to say these numbers, like that's all, I mean, I think it's good just to stop and be like, $4 trillion? Like, where is this money going? And the reality is $1 trillion of it, literally 25% of it, estimate, is going toward admin expense, right? So it would make a lot of sense if, the GDP per capita,
headache.
It's crazy. The GDP per capita is increasing so dramatically compared to life expectancy. Well, it would make a lot of sense if the money's not even going to healthcare. If it's going to an admin, like, yeah, you're not going to get any, good outcomes. I think insurance is a huge problem. I mean, I think, recently on the UnitedHealthcare CEO killing, the fact that we're even in a world where, something like that happens, and then you see all swaths of people who come and I wouldn't necessarily say defend. I think we all agree it's a tragedy. Someone didn't deserve to die. But the fact that people can even kind of see and understand how an insurance company has caused so much harm, maybe in some world it's justified. The fact that's even a conversation, that's something that's even deliberated over, I think is an entire encapsulation of the current state of U.S. healthcare. There's a dramatic distrust where, because of this per capita expenditure and people feel as if insurance companies are frankly just playing games with them. I always like to say also the most valuable healthcare company in the world today is UnitedHealthcare. I don't think that's going to be true 10 years from now. I mean, how is the fact that the most valuable healthcare company in the world is an insurance company? Are we serious? Where is the health innovation? So there's a kind of conflicts between insurance, kind of the paternalism and kind of regulatorily complex, right? These almost like these three things of insurance, regulations, and in some way doctors kind of, it's the old expression, don't hate the player, hate the game, right? Kind of need to be part of the system that just stifles innovation. It also creates a system that's entirely oriented about being a sick care system, right? All the focus and energy right now is on treating disease. I get sick, and then here's this pill. Feels
like it's reactive, not proactive.
Extremely reactive. It's not proactive at all. You have to wonder, why is it that even though we've had such innovation in diagnostic testing, genetic testing being a great example of this, whole genome testing being a great example of this, whole genome testing just refers to, reading all your DNA. We're talking about one of the greatest exponential decreasing costs ever. And yet, less than 0.1% of the United States population have actually gotten a whole genome test. That's crazy to me. And if you think about even if you look at just a whole genome test, there are studies that show around 3 million Americans estimated have a genetic marker that dramatically increases the risk for something like colorectal cancer, breast cancer, high cholesterol. Okay, 3 million Americans, over 90% don't know. And all these diseases, if you have these markers, are entirely actionable. Angelina Jolie in 2013 is probably one of the greatest examples of this. and yet people don't know. And the reason why is, if you think about like an insurance company, okay, when does an insurance company actually cover a genetic test? Medicare, the largest insurer in the United States, they will cover a genetic test after you've been diagnosed with cancer. What the hell? That's crazy. I mean, that is sickening. And then if you look at the kind of private health insurance, UnitedHealthcare, we mentioned that. We're talking about they will only cover genetic testing in very specific cases where someone has a family history, even though we know family history fails to account for the vast majority of hereditary cancer cases. And so from that perspective too, you're like, wow, what is going on where the insurance companies won't even cover a swab? I mean, don't forget, it's a swab. You swab your cheek, you can save your life.
And I also feel like the coverage should adjust as more data comes out about people's health. For example, there has been a huge increase in colon cancer in people from the ages of 25 to 36. So people should be getting more colonoscopies, getting more tests for those things.
Exactly.
And I feel like insurance hasn't adjusted itself for those things.
And it's a really slow bureaucratic organization. And I think part of the promise of the new administration, whether you're right or left, I think you have to agree on it, is that making the government more efficient, making the government more in tune to quote unquote its customers, which is, the populace, which is the people, that's inherently a good thing, especially in healthcare.
Yeah. Okay. So I know we briefly discussed the shooting of the UnitedHealthcare CEO. And I agree with what you're saying. The fact that we are in a place right now as a society that actually celebrates the death, not to say everyone's celebrating, but a large majority of people online are actually celebrating and saying it was warranted. He had stated in his manifesto that we spend more on healthcare than any country in the world, but rank 42nd in life expectancy. I actually believe it's 46th. What do you think those reasons are, and what's the correlation between the pharmaceutical industry as well as the food industry as well as the healthcare industry in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of thoughts on this. One is that one thing is, there's always this idea of lifespan and health span, right? We cite life expectancy numbers too, but it's under what conditions are we even talking about life expectancy as well, right? Someone can live to, 80, but they could be dying. Right, they could be dying for 5 years, 6 years. My grandmother, she recently passed away. She had cancer, and she was suffering for years. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, in a way, it's longer life expectancy, but it's a kind of much smaller health span, which I think gets to the point of kind of what's wrong. Well, let's actually look about what's killing people in the United States today. It's very clear. If you look at all deaths in 2022, 2023, more than 50% are from chronic conditions, cancers. Right? Diabetes, heart disease, for example, or more than 50% of deaths in the United States. We're talking about millions of people. If you look at it in the mid-1850s, right, what was the number one cause of death? Do you know? Any chance? No, probably no idea, right?
The plague? I don't know.
Well, in a way, right? Bacterial infection. By far, the largest cause of death in the mid-1800s. So now, this is actually an interesting kind of thought experiment. It's okay, the number one cause of death today is chronic conditions. They basically kill around 55% of Americans. It's approximate. In 1850, the number one cause of death was bacterial infection, and it also killed actually around 55% of Americans. So in both these cases, dramatically different, right? What actually got us out of the debacle of bacterial infection? Well, it was antibiotics, it was vaccines, etc. In other words, it was technological innovation that enabled the rapid increase in life expectancy. Because if you look at life expectancy, what you notice is that we going from around almost 40 years to about 80 years, approximately doubling in 150 years. That's what I believe it is approximately in the United States. And from that angle, that's actually a kind of dramatic success, right? But if you look at the last couple of years, life expectancy actually come down a little bit. So that the trend, in the immediate short term hasn't continued. And so I like to say, history doesn't repeat itself, but does rhyme. And the best way to think about how do we solve this problem of life expectancy in the future is in the same way that, they looked at what was killing us in, 1850 and said, okay, bacterial infections killing us. Hey, here's all these innovations. We need to say chronic conditions are killing us today. What are the new innovations that we need to utilize? It wasn't a single innovation that brought life expectancy forward. It wasn't just vaccines. It wasn't just antibiotics. It was also something like pasteurization, right? It was also obviously better food, etc. And so that's the kind of framework, my entire framework and thinking about longevity today. I actually gave a talk about this recently at the Buck Institute. We sponsored the Buck Institute, the Longevity Summit. So I think this will be on YouTube. My entire theory today on kind of life expectancy and what is the problem is, let's focus on what's actually killing us. And then let's focus on how do we actually prevent these conditions. So let's look into it. Look at cancer, right? Heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, these other chronic conditions. Let's just take one random one. Heart disease, for example. Heart disease is around 50% genetic. It's 50% non-genetic. What actually drives heart disease? It's basically a complex function between genetics, sure, and also the things you know. How much you exercise. What do you eat, right? What air do you breathe? Right? In other words, a series of different lifestyle and environmental factors. So these aren't conditions that, there's some sort of kind of acute moment where you get cancer, right? It's a buildup of our behaviors over time. And I'm optimistic that we'll actually be able to solve this problem precisely because, probably speaking, in the mid-1800s, it seemed very unreasonable that we were able to kind of cure us from these, kind of invisible enemies that were attacking us, bacteria, whatever. And in the same way now, it probably seems very unlikely we'll be able to stop the kind of proliferation of cells. But I think that both need the same kind of framework of addressing and solving. And then it's like, how do we have better food? How do we have better water? They're all these questions as well. How do we have earlier, more aggressive screening, right? I think it's going to be a complex function of both kind of diet, environment, and changing the lifestyle in America, combined with innovative diagnostic tests and kind of a real-time tracking health system. All these variables will come together. That's going to catalyze, I think, a new era of American healthcare.
So it sounds like a super proactive system versus the reactive system that we have now.
Yes.
And so I was watching one of your earlier interviews. I think it was for three Course Founders. It was a great interview.
Yeah.
You did say that insurance companies shouldn't exist and won't exist in the future. I just want to understand what you mean by that.
There's actually a YouTube comment of someone griping on that comment, which was, I thought, very interesting because I thought of all the things I said in that interview, that wouldn't be the one. But what do I mean by that? Well, so a couple things about insurance companies, which is that could one imagine a world where everything is out of pocket? I think so. The reason for this is a lot of things. One is that I think everything's gonna get much cheaper. So one thing the person in the YouTube comment, and God bless whoever you are, love the comment. One thing they were kind of griping on is how expensive everything is. And I agree, everything's really, really expensive. I mean, if you look at healthcare expenditure, I can't remember the exact statistic, but in essence, 1% over 5% of the people are responsible for 95% of the expenditure.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's crazy. If you're sick, you cost a lot of money. A lot of money. If you have some sort of chronic disease or whatnot, right? So let's be clear on where is the money that insurance companies actually spend going. It doesn't go to 95% of people. It goes to a fraction of people who are sick, old, and dying. Likely old, but not always old.
And are those the people that are responsible for the $220 billion in medical debt as well?
Probably, yes. The first thing to say about insurance is to say, all right, all this different kind of claims are going toward a small kind of cohort of the population, which will always be true at a population level, right? Obviously, if you're sick, it's your world, you're sick, it's N of one, it's kind of like everything to you. But at a population level, actually a very small portion of the people are sick. Most people are actually pretty healthy most of the time. Excuse me. So then I think to myself, okay, well, if that's the case, is there a world where all these different diagnostic testing and treating can get much cheaper? And I think the answer to that question is yes. I mean,
but would the U.S., would the government, all the lobbyists, the companies, would they allow it to get cheaper?
Well, that's the thing. That's actually the interesting thing, which is it's not a technological limitation. It's an ideological limitation, which I think is actually both really great and really horrible at the same time. It's really great because once you realize that one of the reasons why healthcare is not so cheap is because it's not actually because of the technology. It's great because that means it can, physically speaking, there's no laws of physics that's stopping us from being able to actually literally make healthcare cheaper. I think it's really bad because nothing's worse than politics, and trying to get the kind of, again, this political regulatory structure to try to actually bring healthcare costs down. So one of my favorite examples is I know someone building a company that I'm going to do a really bad job kind of synthesizing it down, but the point will come across regardless. Where what they do is they basically use kind of your iPhone camera to make some sort of eye assessment, right? So you like hold the camera to your eye and it makes some like kind of snapshot assessment, right? And he was telling me about, I was like, well, who are your competitors? Like this is like
assessment of what? Really quick.
I don't even remember. Some assessment that they do, I think to get some sense of like how with it the patient is, right?
Okay.
Something about like, is the patient knocked out or are they like fully there? Like, I don't know. And what I thought was so interesting is I asked him like, who's the competitor, right? When I try to think about things in startups or technology, I always try to think of things that are very inductively. So like whatever someone gives me a data point, I always like to try to connect it to some like broader kind of abstracted point about whatever the system. And I said, okay, so who's the competitor? You know, the competitor is not some other sexy Silicon Valley startup that's raised, you know, $30 million. The comparison was some God knows medical device company you never heard of. And he told me that the way it works is they deliberately design the device in such a way that they basically has consumables such that which each time they use the device, right, it has like it has a really like a handicapped maximum where maybe you can do 10 patients, right? So like, let's say a patient comes in, I have this device that I can do like 10 clicks of it, and I have to rebuy the consumable to redo it again, right? And so what happens is that this device is in every single hospital room across every single hospital in the country. Okay, you see where I'm going with this? And he's like, it's completely arbitrary what they've done. They've literally intentionally have designed the device in such a bad way that it costs, you know, the hospitals so much money just to actually replace the consumables. He's like, you could just be done with the iPhone. Everyone has an iPhone already. And by the way, it's not like you can take only 10 iPhone pictures. You could take 1 million. Actually, you don't even need to have, you know, 100,000 iPhones. You'd have just one that you could just do it, you know, whatever, 1 million times, 10 million times, 1 billion times. And this was such a great example to me. It was so illuminating because I was like, wow, this is such an obviously like correct thing to do. Like obviously you should, I mean, this is a nice camera, right? If you can build some software on top of it to make it work, that seems like something that's like technically extremely feasible. It's mass adopted, right? The iPhone's mass adopted, which is why implicitly you see Apple becoming more and more like a healthcare company. That's one other thing. And then the last point is like, well then why is that? Why does the hospital not just adopt, you know, your tech? You know, politics, regulation, existing infrastructure. And that's what you find so much in healthcare. It's not that there's not technological solutions that don't exist. It's that there's a regulatory, political, kind of paternalistic infrastructure that inhibits innovation. So this is my long way of saying that if I inductively apply this concept to every single medical device and every single possible care, also implicit in my mind, I'm kind of swapping out humans for humanoids as well. I think that's going to inevitably happen. I mean, I see the Tesla bots running around. It's just a matter of snapping your fingers, and I'm sure a lot of healthcare will be replaced by that, which isn't a bad thing. I think jobs will just get better and better. There'll be more value created for society. All these things considered, you know, we're not even talking about a world where that 5% of people is going to anywhere match near the expenditure. So all this being said, I actually think you can very much see a world where you build a real-time, consumer-centric, quantified health system that basically, you know, no insurance needed.
So let's say regulatory hurdles aside, do you think AI will lower the cost expenditure for healthcare?
For sure, yes, I do. I think there's two kinds of companies I like to think of, and I mentioned this at 3 Cores too. It's like one kind of company is like, we're going to build software that kind of is for the existing system, right? There's some really disturbing. I read something recently, I think it was on Twitter probably, about how, you know, there's still systems that use fax machines, right? And how like it still like runs a lot of medicine. And I was like, and then basically they're like, oh, we have this new AI tool that will like, you know, whatever, makes this, like you take a picture and it like makes it better. Like that's great. That's really nice. It's sort of like a good fix for a broken system, right? I always like to think more kind of less evolutionary and more revolutionary, in that I think you need to build a system that completely replaces the existing healthcare infrastructure. I don't think anyone can look at the healthcare system today and say, man, wow, this really works well. I mean, it's crazy.
I don't think I've ever met a single person that's been like, I love American healthcare.
But what's amazing too is even the doctors don't like it, right? If you ask a doctor, I mean, my dad hates health. He loves patients. I mean, it's like a kind of almost like a founder thing. You love serving customers. He loves serving his customers. He loves, you know, he gives people their vision back. There's nothing I think greater than that. I mean, that's one of the, like just amazing, the fact that he can, you know, move his hands around and then boom, it's like magic, right? For patients. He hates the insurance companies.
No, and sometimes I feel like with my previous doctor, when I had an autoimmune disease in college, it was like me and the doctor and my family versus insurance over and over and over again, and it's exhausting. And I only imagine for people who don't even have access to like a primary care facility to begin with and things like that, and they have to pay out of pocket, they're not insured, it only gets more difficult for them.
And if you read, Luigi's manifesto, he talks exactly like that. His mom got sick, then he got sick, and then they started this insurance dance where they wouldn't cover it. And that's not to say, obviously, whether what he did is or not is justified. That's besides the point. The point is that there is a system today that impacts millions and millions of Americans where everyone in the system knows it's not working. And what are we going to do about it? Are we going to build solutions and technology that basically kind of patters to the status quo? Or are we going to throw everything out the window, because we should be, and say, hey, we're going to rebuild from scratch? I like to think of, Tesla is always a great example here. SpaceX is always a great example here, right? When Elon built Tesla, he's not thinking, okay, let me build some, solution that's going to, help the manufacturing to improve the production of a Toyota. No, that's not what he did. He didn't build some AI tool that actually made something in the existing infrastructure, much worse. He tried to make cars into basically software, right? It's like it literally becomes a software company in a way, obviously not literally, but in a way, right? And so, kind of the classic first principles thinking, right? SpaceX too, reusable rockets, right? It wasn't like, oh, let me go build a company that's going to help Boeing do their things better. No, I'm going to build a company that's going to replace Boeing. I'm going to build a company that's going to replace NASA. In the same way, my ambition is not to build a company that's going to help the regulatory, insurance complex. My job is to build a company that replaces it completely. And I think the greatest means and arena isn't, shooting someone. It's in the capital markets. It's in giving people better services for cheaper and actually more effectively helping stave off disease and eventually treating disease. How do you do that? It comes down to data, because medicine is really just bad data science. And when you look at it from that angle, you realize everything we do in the healthcare system is fundamentally wrong, including the way that doctors are generally educated. And to be very clear, I have the utmost respect for doctors. My dad's a physician. He's helped save so many patient lives, or visions, I should say more specifically. There's nothing more commendable than becoming a physician, but that does not mean that the entire medical schooling is anywhere near where it should be today. I mean, it's nowhere near where it should be today. These are curriculums that are written without the idea of, the internet, much less AI, that exist. And so, doctors are overwhelmed. There's far few doctors. There's also an arbitrary restriction on doctors in this country that doesn't really make sense, right? People talk about how there's not a lot of supply of doctors. And, if you think about it, it's sort of, again, kind of regulatory capture here, right?
But why? What was the purpose of that regulation? Like, why would that exist? I
mean, maybe the American Medical Association doesn't want that to happen. The doctor, be quite a quasi-union. I don't know. I don't know why there's so limited doctors. I mean, probably if you ask because I'm sure the American Medical Association has some policy or opinion on this. And I'm sure if you ask them, they probably want to create loops, right? Because someone has to give someone an MD, right? It's like a JD, right? And there has to be some government that says, yes, you are a doctor, right? It's an entity that says you are a doctor. And this entity, they probably want less doctors because then they can make more money. It's that simple, right? Which is inherently anti-patient, it's anti-consumer. So my model is almost like, why do you need to do organic chemistry, right, to become a doctor? You really don't. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. Why are you doing, some calculus? Let's be real. You're not going to do calculus on the job. I mean, are you kidding me? Come on. And it teaches you how to think. There's a lot of ways to learn how to think. You don't need to spend spending 5 years learning, organic chemistry you're never going to do. I'm sorry. It's true. I think Matt's laughing over there. But it's true. You don't need to do that. And you need to call a spade a spade. You need to call a spade a spade. You don't need to do that. So that being said, I'm well, then, why could we, and this is kind of a radical idea, and I think a lot of people in the medical community would strongly disagree with this idea, but I'm going to put it out there because I think it's interesting. Why can't we produce, I don't know, 100,000 doctors, million doctors, in 2 years, right? What if we looked at the medical, curriculum and we applied, Department of Government Efficiency energy to it? I'm serious. And we said, what is actually valuable here? Which I would argue one of the most valuable things is actually bedside manner. It's bedside manner and then some sophisticated AI system, frankly, because it's someone needs to talk to the patient, understand enough about, the kind of specific specialty. And they probably need to be able to access and effectively communicate with an AI system. I mean, you're already seeing AI systems that outperform doctors, not only in the accuracy of the diagnosis, but in empathy, which I always thought was interesting. That's surprising.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
There are so many. Yeah. If you go to I remember I went to a hospital And this was when I was having like an autoimmune breakout. I had like blisters in my throat. It was scary, whatever. Anyways, I go there and I'm supposed to get an IV. And I remember like they thought I was a drug addict because
Really?
I hadn't slept, I hadn't eaten. They refused to give me medication and I couldn't talk.
Oh, God.
So I was writing on my phone. I was like, ma'am, I can't talk. And I was just crying. And I really didn't want any needles because I'm scared of needles. But I just remember this one was like, you need to stop crying. And I was like,
Oh my God.
oh my gosh. First of all, like I'm in so much pain right now. But second of all, I think bedside manner is super important. And I think a lot of doctors/nurses just completely neglect that. And also I feel like it gets worse for different people. Like I have heard there's a lot of discrimination against people who like enter the healthcare system who are insured, who are covered. Mm-hmm. Obviously they get better treatment, they get treated better, they get spoken to nicer, versus if you have less of a not as good of an insurance or something, sometimes you get more attitude. And I think if that's something that can be fixed completely with AI, that would be amazing.
Yeah. And any diagnosis is really just a series of kind of information inputs that then someone makes some sort of diagnosis, right? It's really, if you go to a doctor, if you think about it, they're really running kind of pretty crude, mostly qualitative models in their head. So you go to a doctor, they ask you a question, they get information, ask you another question, they get information, right? And they do ask you a series of questions. There's almost different paths in their mind, right? It's almost like a video game of if this, then that, then this, right? If this, okay, ask another question, okay, another question, okay, another question. Oh, based off my kind of decision tree, right, which they all have in their mind, they've done it, trust me, 10,000 times and asking these series of questions, you should do this thing, right? And then this thing is some drug, maybe it's some follow-up testing, whatever. And in other words, what I'm trying to say is that entire process is completely AI-able. So it's completely automizable.
But okay, so it sounds like
automated.
Like what you
I don't
said,
even know. What is the word?
What you said with the doctor in the pocket. Does that mean replacing doctors or nurses entirely?
I think
are we gonna have a humanoid doctor?
I think a humanoid doctor would be pretty cool. We should actually put like a lab coat on a doctor, and I think should have a walk around. Maybe we buy one of those like Tesla humanoid robots, and I put like a jacket on it, like like one of those doctor jackets on it, and I have it walk around Nucleus. I'd be like, hey, here's the new doctor of the future. That'd be funny. I do think there's a world where doctors are completely supplanted. I mean, I should say differently. I think doctors will ultimately be the entire job will be redefined. I don't think it's like doctors. It's something entirely different. I mean, there's going to be just AI ingesting a lot of data from people. It's going to be a real time system that continuously tracks you.
That's what I was saying.
It's going to be a molecular profiling system that tracks every kind of interaction in your body. Your DNA, your microbiome, your epigenetics. I feel like
it's going to know more, like these, let's say, hypothetical humanoid robot will know more than a doctor would ever know because it's just so much information.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. And the AI system, this kind of, almost omniscient in silico doctor is going to, ingest all your different diagnostic information, and then it's going to basically be able to flag molecular aberrations prior to any phenotypic signal. Let me give you an example of this, a very small example. I sleep on an 8-seat mattress, great mattress. Shout out to Mateo. He's one of our investors as well. And I woke up one day and I had, my heart rate had shot up 50% the night before. And I thought to myself, that's crazy. Probably a bug in the system that my heart rate's not 50%. That's crazy. It's no way it's true. And then around 24 hours later, I was feverishly sick. And I was like, in some weird way that actually my heart rate, jumping up way before I actually predicted that I was going to get sick. And then, maybe I probably would have, actually not maybe, I would have definitely operated the day differently. Ideally, the AI system would go, hey, your heart rate's super up. You should probably go down to the one medical down your street and get a COVID test ASAP, right? Because this is probably COVID or whatever the given thing is at the time of whatever it suspects based off, it knows where I've been, it knows who I've interacted with, it knows all this information about me, right? And then I actually realized that Michael Schneider, brilliant scientist who's done a lot of work in kind of precision medicine and thinking about integrating in different diagnostic tests, he actually has showed in studies that, heart rates will jump up prior to kind of actually getting a cold or whatnot, right? And like, that's such an obvious thing to me that should be integrated. Like, obviously it'd be great before, you get sick. Because when you get sick, it's like you get sick really hard, right? Yeah. So if you can prepare yourself, that's the entire ethos of kind of preventive medicine, either preventing the onset of or the development of a fever or cold, etc. So this is a great example where today, using today's existing software, right, on a device that, I don't necessarily think today it's intended for, medical purposes, already providing medical insight. And I'm like, wow, now imagine that, like, again, inductively at scale between Aura, Levels, Sleep, Apple Watch, and then that's on the kind of personal hardware device side. On the lab testing side, blood tests, epigenetics, genetics, microbiome, combining all those data sets together that is real-time tracking you and your body, you can identify disease far before the healthcare system can today. Moreover, if you do get disease, you're going to be able to find more target actual treatments. I mean, we still live in a healthcare system where drugs are actually affect people dramatically differently, and it's not even genetically informed. Right? There's an entire class of genetic analysis called pharmacogenomics, basically talks about DNA affects metabolism of drugs, and yet it's not mass integrated. People still take drugs that are not as effective for them. And so all these things, I constantly think about how there's already science today of this happening, and I think we're going to go through like an internet-like revolution in healthcare.
Okay. Wow.
Sorry, I talk fast.
We got lots of information, lots of things coming. So in the perfect world, like the future of healthcare, give me a snapshot in 100 years of what the U.S. healthcare system will be like. First of all, are people going to live forever?
I think we can live forever. I think the way we think about living forever, people. So I think about this a lot of ways. One is that, like, I like to think that our base case in the industry, if you're in the health industry, if you're in the longevity industry, our base case in industry is we should try to double life expectancy in the next 150 years, because that's what we've done. So there's a lot of people in kind of outside the longevity spaces that will go, this is a delusional idea. This is crazy. No way you're gonna live forever, right? Like what is, a friend of ours, Brian Johnson, right, trying to live forever. He's doing amazing work. And people will look at that and say, this is crazy. It's never going to work.
How much has he reduced his age by?
A lot. I mean, it depends on the organ, but a lot. I mean, he measures the different organs and then kind of determines what's his actual kind of, biological age right now. I don't remember it offhand, but it's dramatic. It's really dramatic.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. And Brian is an amazing person. And so I think when I think about longevity, and you ask, like, do you can live forever? I think that the kind of worst case is we do what we've already done, which is we double life expectancy in the next 150 years. And as maybe that sounds sci-fi to some people, I actually think that's like kind of the bare minimum, because that's what we've already done. I mean, we've done that before. We know for a fact that it's not science fiction to say we can double human life expectancy. We know for a fact that's not, just like fiction. So why can't we do it again? So when you ask me if I can live forever, I like to think of it as, what are the things that are killing us today? In the same way that, in the mid 1850 example I gave, it was, antibiotics that helped solve that problem. Today, I think what's going to be the kind of silver bullet, so to speak, or the mix of different bullets that are going to solve the problem of chronic disease. I don't think it will be a silver bullet, to be clear. I think it'll be a complex interaction of different innovation. And I, on that point, think that if we do this kind of thought experiment enough, I mean, do I think we could live forever? Possibly. I mean, eventually it's going to probably need some sort of kind of molecular restarting of cells, but I mean, still cells are kind of rebirthing themselves all the time. So I think yes, basically my answer is yes. And I think to bring it down to another level is, I think we can double life expectancy in the next 150 years.
I just had a question that popped up in my head about there's been a lot of study around the animals that live very, very long. Is the horseshoe crab that lives like 250 years or something?
There's jellyfish live really long. There's some sharks that live really long.
Yeah, the basking shark. It can live over 150 years old.
Yeah.
It's like a fossil, a moving fossil.
Yeah.
What is the correlation between the animals living long? I heard it's their heartbeat.
I think maybe something like that. It's like is it a slower heartbeat? I don't know.
They have a super slow heartbeat.
I think that's what it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we should definitely study these organisms more, and they're definitely probably understudied. One of the things that you realize very quickly when you're in some sort of scientific frontier is that we know a lot less things than people would think, right? You often think like, I imagine like, I don't know about kind of the jellyfish longevity specifically, but I imagine that there's some jellyfish longevity experts, right? There's some people in the world that know that. There's some probably jellyfish journal that if I really got into jellyfish, I could find out this journal. You go there, read about all the jellyfish, and that I probably, if I read all the papers and kind of digested all the papers, I would realize, wow, people really don't know or understand, jellyfish longevity. Like they really don't. They really know it lives long, but they actually don't understand what the hell is going on. And you realize that across many kind of different scientific disciplines, where what you would imagine is known is actually dramatically less known. And I think that's always kind of interesting going up to the intellectual frontier in that way. So I'm very curious, and I mean, I almost want to, after this podcast, go and look up, jellyfish longevity and see if I can actually find a paper on it, which I definitely can.
If you do, send it to me.
I will.
Okay, but sorry, going back to what we were talking about previously, which is the vision of what it looks like, the world of healthcare looks like in 100 years.
Oh, yeah.
Give me the snapshot.
Yeah. I think any physical labor is humanoids, for sure. I think for sure. Anything that requires, so I'm going to tell you my ideal vision. I don't necessarily say...
Okay, you know what? You pretend you are the president of this country. Okay?
Wonderful.
Kian country.
Great.
Nucleus is the capital. It's a wonderful place.
Matt's like, oh God. He's like, oh my God. He's like, this is not good.
Tell me what the perfect healthcare system looks like.
So I like to imagine a healthcare system that is actually at home and discreet. It's bespoke. Also has good taste, but maybe that's for some people besides the point. Healthcare, they don't have good taste. I mean, we gotta have better, more beautiful products. I mean, we gotta serve people better.
I know, it's
Anyways,
very unattractive.
I think that we need to be tracking basically every single biomarker in the entire human body, effectively, if not every day, nearly every day.
Biomarker? What is
so
that?
like LDL. If you know LDL, like if you take a blood test, it's like a biomarker, just like some marker in your body that indicates something about your health. Think about
Got it.
right? Whether it's your genetics, epigenetics, microbiome, it could be a lot of things. And so when I think about a at-home health system, I think about a system where there are very miniaturized different devices that, I mean, I really hate to say this, but the whole kind of drop of blood idea isn't the worst idea, right? That's one of many examples of kind of health tracking, right? Where, you can get a little prick on your blood that can tell you all about your different metabolites. So today, if I want to get a blood test, for example, I, have to go to Quest. And I go to Quest. First off, it's slow as hell. Software is old. You feel like you're in kind of like it's like doomsday in there. Like it does not a good vibe.
And it's also, it gives you so much anxiety because it's like your test results are back. And it's like, am I positive? Am I negative? What's going on?
Exactly. A lot of anxiety. It's super stressful. Patients don't really know what's going on.
50 million different accounts.
Oh my God, 100 different
lost
accounts.
Passwords,
bad software. It's
nightmare.
horrible. You go there, you show up, you sit down. They don't really know if you've eaten or not in the last 12 hours. They don't really care. You sit down, they shove a needle in your arm. They collect whatever, 6 vials of blood, 7 vials of blood, maybe even more sometimes, depending on what kind of test you're doing. Right. And then the results, whatever, take 2 weeks. It's just a bad system. Like now, even if you actually look at full body MRI, it's not like an example of this, right? Where you have to go, it's extremely expensive. It takes like your entire day. There's some like negative effects of it as well, yada, yada, yada. Now, again, apply this inductively across everything where it's like, okay, there's physical infrastructure that produces information. Some of such physical infrastructure has already been kind of miniaturized and, is now a wearable, right? You can think of that, Apple Watch is a very early sign of this. You can think of if you could somehow do a blood test at home, not by injecting, but by just simply putting your finger down on a device that then tracks it. You can think of a full body MRI. Imagine when I woke up in my bed. I don't know, this is going to sound crazy and delusional, but that's why we're here. Imagine I woke up in my bed. It's like, oh, we did the body scan. One of my HC becomes a full body MRI machine. Hey, don't worry, we didn't detect cancer. Sick. And there's like no, radiation effects. I mean, that'd be amazing.
That would be sick.
I mean, that would probably cure, save more lives than anything else we could, possibly conceive. I can imagine also a world where all this data is fed into a single application, a single omniscient health AI, a la the doctor in your pocket. And that's why we really view ourselves as the application layer for healthcare. Because if you notice when I'm describing this future, there's many different diagnostic devices at home. They're all kind of tracking and measuring different parts of you. but who's going to actually make sense of that data and bring all the pieces together? Because healthcare is inherently multimodal, meaning there's many different variables and many different factors. And whether it's a blood test, a genetic test, epigenetic test, microbiome test, urine analyses, full body MRI, really to give the best proper diagnosis and treatment, you need to integrate all of that data. And the analogy I like to use here is similar to Instagram. It sounds very counterintuitive. What the hell does that have to do with Instagram? But the reason for that is it's sort of like the digitization of photos. What do I mean? Well, photos back in the day was in a dark room. You take a picture, you had to go develop in the dark room. Really slow, very low throughput. Eventually Kodak came out, got a little bit better. Then the iPhone eventually came out. And you can see with the rise of the iPhone, an exponential proliferation in photo data. Right? Obviously, if everyone has a camera in their pocket, there's going to be a lot more photos. How high is your camera roll? How many pictures?
Yeah.
I have no clue. Probably much less than other people.
Mine's 82,000.
Wow. 82,000.
Yeah, I got all that storage. I got I maxed out on the Apple storage. Mm-hmm.
How's that? That's like...
these are photos from since I was
that's like
12 years old.
That feels like 250 pictures a day or something if I did my math in my head very quickly.
I definitely don't take that many. I do take photos probably
on
every
average
day of random stuff.
Maybe a lot of screenshots. A lot of screenshots? I don't know. 82,000. Wait, actually 82,000 over what time? Not in a year.
No.
Okay.
This is since I was 14, 13.
Okay. For some reason I was like, that's impossible. I was like,
that'd be a little crazy.
Anyways, so it's like photos. So where everyone has an iPhone in their pocket and they start taking pictures of things, then what happens is that there's an exponential proliferation in photos, in data, which is photos. And it wasn't the Photos app on the iPhone, right? The iPhone has the Photos app. It wasn't the Photos app that made sense of everyone's photos data. It was Instagram. In other words, a hardware device, namely your iPhone, your smartphone, was responsible for the exponential proliferation in data, namely in this case, photo data. And then photo data was actually taken by another company, Instagram, and the data was actually made useful. You could share it, you could like it, you could edit it, etc. I really think the same analogy holds for healthcare, where there's going to be different devices, a la the iPhone, that produce data, and it's going to be a separate company, not the hardware companies, right? Because Apple ultimately is incentivized to sell more hardware, right? That's why they never built Instagram, right? I mean, they have an app store for that reason. It's for other developers to come in and build software. In the same way that all these different hardware companies, their job is to sell hardware. There's going to be another company, an application layer company, that's going to basically integrate in all this data. And then in doing so, we can have that future that I outlined to you, where as all those diagnostic tests get better and better and better, miniaturized, and ideally are at home, all that data will combine then into kind of an omniscient AI that's always got your back. It always knows what's going on with you. It knows about every part of your body and will flag far before any onset of disease before it happens. And then in doing that, I think the upper bound of how long we can live is really, really actually indefinite. I really think there's a unbelievable amount that we could survive. So
who says we need our bodies or our organs to survive? What if we just need our brains?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I think there's always this question, if I do a lot of meditation, it's like, well, when someone dies, you see their physical body dead, but unfortunately, if you look at, people in my family have died recently, and when you see the dead body, it's almost like the body's there, but they're not. But then it makes you think in just like this kind of causal experiment. You're like, well, it must not be the body. Like the body isn't the thing, the soul is, and people. Yeah. Maybe take this all sorts of ways, but the soul to me is probably a real. It's not probably, to me the soul is a real thing, and the soul is not physical. So there's different planes. There's the intellectual plane, right? Kind of thinking. If you get really, really deep in thinking, you enter a kind of a different universe, right? It's it's hard to explain, but it's a different world. If you are thinking right now, we're in the physical plane, right? I can touch things. If you're dreaming, you're in another world. Literally, you're in another plane. If you're astral projecting, you're in another world, another plane. Now we're getting into it. But anyways, there's many planes. So the soul is real.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to dive into that another time. Okay, but circling back on a little bit more regarding the genetic testing. So how do you feel about designer babies?
It's funny that actually on Twitter today, people were talking about this, and I was trying to send out some corrections to people on how this actually works. I think that yeah.
And do you think it will be? Is it possible today to make build a baby basically instead of build a bear?
Build a baby. I think that a lot of genetics is actually much less advanced than people think in that respect. And I was saying this, which is like, people want it to be such that you can use a gene editing device to basically, correct a letter in your DNA, and then all of a sudden, you don't need sleep. All of a sudden, I don't know, you won't get any disease or something. And it's maybe to some extent true, but reality is with a lot of conditions, they're polygenic. What does that mean? The old model of genetics was that a single gene drove a disease. So, if you think about the word mutation, geneticists don't really use that word anymore, but if you think about the word mutation, there's a mutation, right, in someone's gene. And then because of that, it causes a disease, whatever, cancer. But now the new model of genetic analysis and the kind of architecture and the way that genetics helps shape diseases and traits is that they're polygenic. What this means is they're not driven by one gene, but many genes. And so that means for a lot of conditions, you would need to basically engineer many, many, many parts of someone's genome to actually get the desired effect. You wouldn't just edit a small part. Now, I'm sure very, very, kind of smart or, person's going to say, oh, well, there's this variant that actually is, has someone to be a short sleeper. It is true that despite polygenicity, right, which is a universal fact, which is like any trait you can think of from height to breast cancer is caused by many genes. It's not caused by one gene or many variants. But if you think about something like, short sleep, it was older age recently. Short sleep is interesting because there are known markers that actually can have it such that someone is only needs 4 hours of sleep, for example. And in that case, the way that the phenotypes exhibit in humans is one where there are many, many variants. Variants are just DNA differences across many, many genes, right? That basically confer the phenotype, as I just described, this kind of idea of polygenicity. But it is true that there are markers that are really, really bad or have really, really large effect on a phenotype, right? And the equivalent of breast cancer would be like BRCA, for example. Maybe this is getting too complicated. My point is that You're
speaking a whole other language. I'm here for it though.
No, I know.
I'm just like absorbing what I can.
Okay. It is possible for what people want to be true about genetic engineering isn't true, but there's some parts of that are true.
But won't it be true one day? It's going to be possible one day, right?
It will be true. Like, there will be, if we can do multiplex engineering, so if we can actually in parallel engineer up to 1 million sites in your DNA, yes, it will be true. But that's kind of my point, which is it's actually much more complicated than people think. That said, and there is that said, there are markers that are rare that are high penetrant, which means they have a large effect on a phenotype, right? So, for example, if I look at the short sleep example, right, there's a marker that makes someone that they only need to have short sleep, and it's just one mark in your DNA. If you look at just that marker, then it is true you could engineer that specifically. So in that way, yes, it is true, but in the way that these are polygenic, it's not what people think, right, in terms of engineering. Does that make sense?
More or less. So in the future, what do you think, like, are there any patterns today that you've seen will heavily impact people in the future? Like, for example, is there anything that you've tested with genetics that we can use right now with data that you have to predict future outcomes of people's health?
Yeah, any disease. So like
what are the patterns that you've seen, if any?
What do you mean, like when predicting disease, or what do you mean?
Yeah, any patterns of disease that you've seen so far?
Like in people if people who are sick, or people in their genetics, or?
Yeah, in their genetics.
An estimated probably around 5% of customers have a genetic marker that dramatically increases the risk for a condition that they learn through us. Around 80% of customers have a marker for a rare disease that, because they don't have 2 copies, they don't have it, but can dramatically impact their children. For example, I'm a cystic fibrosis carrier, so I actually didn't even know that until I did Nucleus. I'm a carrier for a variant that if my future son or daughter gets another bad copy, they would have a disease. That's the importance of kind of what's called preconception screening or doing genetic testing in the family planning context. Something that Nucleus is actually going to launch next year. We're actually going to launch the most expansive panel for family planning. Nothing's more important than having healthy children. That's another, I think, really interesting thing. Another one is that every person is actually at very high risk for at least one common disease, but basically no one knows it. I'm actually at really high risk for, this is always a funny thing, I'm actually at really high risk for schizophrenia.
Really? You don't say? No, I'm kidding.
Matt's like, oh God. Matt's like, I knew it. Matt's like, this is the fourth time I have to hear him. Yeah, I'm actually
He's like,
really
here
high.
we go
He's
again.
like, oh wow. He's like, oh God.
So we've been knowing this.
Yeah,
we've been
knowing this. Exactly. It's just crazy. But no,
Any
seriously,
signs
it's crazy.
or what?
What's interesting is you can be really high genetic risk for schizophrenia. I'm actually 99 percentile, 99.3 specifically. And what's interesting about schizophrenia is that you can be a really high genetic risk for it, but still have a really low overall chance. That's because schizophrenia is a pretty rare condition, relatively rare condition, relative to other common diseases. So said differently, like even though I'm high genetic risk, I'm not likely to get schizophrenia. I think I have a 1.5% chance.
But it can be triggered, right?
Well,
by
that's the thing.
Ayahuasca.
Well, this is exactly where I was going, which is like, people, one of the most actionable things I learned from my Nucleus results was like, I've personally never done any drugs, but I'm like, my God, am I never really doing any drugs? Because I am in 99 percentile for my genetic risk for schizophrenia. I am not going to do drugs. I'm not going to do psychedelics, right? There's no kind of trips like that for me. Haha, pun intended.
I see. Okay.
Let's go.
That was a good one. That was so good.
So that is something that I get that in the podcast.
So sorry.
You have to get that in the podcast.
Okay.
That is fire. No trips like that. I mean, wow.
It's
Anyways,
gasoline. Continue.
And so when you think about what's interesting about something like schizophrenia, and actually really any phenotype, is that, let's think about height. It's a much simpler example. If someone's very tall, it's just a trait. Someone's very tall, great. If someone's very, very, very tall, it's actually a disease. It's called Marfan syndrome. People know that intuitively on the other end as well. If someone's short, they're short, whatever. If they're extremely, extremely short, it's dwarfism. It's another disease. In other words, the extreme end of any phenotype, which just means any kind of trait like height, is a disease. But before then, it's usually some exceptional characteristic. And so schizophrenia is an example of this, where the extreme end of schizophrenia, kind of, as you get schizophrenia, it's really bad. But before then, you actually have some kind of extreme cognitive function or ability. And on that point, I've actually noticed a lot of founders who do Nucleus are really high schizophrenia risk. Genetic risk, yeah. And so I think about that a lot. And I think it's one of the most underappreciated.
You said founders that do?
Yeah, founders, people who start companies who do Nucleus, and I talk about the results if they're comfortable, obviously sharing them with me. And a lot of people are high schizophrenia. A lot of people are very high, and that's a great genetic model too.
It's just founders, or people in general are high chance of
founders.
schizophrenia?
Like founders, people who start companies. If they do Nucleus, they're in the 90, they're very high risk for genetically for schizophrenia. Right, a typical person's average risk, inherently, definitionally.
Yeah.
But founders are really high genetic risk. So
none of them should be doing ayahuasca.
Well, I mean, yeah. I think there's actually two extremes of founders. They're either really, really low or really high. Obviously, there's exceptions to this. Most people definitely share average. But I think that's, I mean, there's something to that. I mean, 99 percentile is a bit extreme. You can be 70th percentile, 80th percentile, right? Which means you have a genetic score that's higher than 80% of people, which again doesn't mean you have an 80% chance. It doesn't mean I have a 99% chance. What it means is just it's higher than 99% of people in my population, which is just like whatever, Middle Eastern. So anyways, I think that that is one of the most interesting and kind of underappreciated parts about genetics today, which is it says something very fundamental. I have other examples too, but
what are the others? I'm so curious. I really want to know.
They're just other examples. Like there are certain people I know who, for example, they're very high genetic risk for OCD. And oh my God, you wouldn't even need their genetics to know. It's like amazing. It's like, wow, that was genetic. Like, of course, like some of my friends are like really kind of OCD.
I didn't even know OCD was genetic.
Yeah, it is actually. Which is it's pretty amazing, right? And I'm like, wow, what the hell? Like this person's so high. I'm like, oh, it kind of, you kind of do this like, it checks out. It kind of checks out. Like it kind of makes sense. That's always really interesting. Also, you can be, yeah.
I feel like the more of these tests that you do, I feel like you're going to be able to figure out so much data. Like, I feel like I saw the screenshot you posted on Twitter of your 8 sleep. Like, the 8 sleep, you're in the top, like the lowest 20%.
Top 20% latest sleeper, which is crazy, by the way, because I sleep at like 12 to 1 a.m. And I'm like, everyone must sleep at 12 to 1 a.m. But then it's like, you're in the top 20%. It's crazy to me. I would think, I don't know why I thought that. Maybe I'm just like such a biased group of people. I am, and I'm a very biased group of people that I just inductively got it wrong.
Yeah. It's that founder's mindset. You guys go to bed late.
I guess, yeah. It's not good. I need to go to sleep. I want to follow more of the Brian Johnson model, which is like, instead of, I like go to sleep around 12, I wake up from like 6 to 7, depends. It's not good. Like, I want more sleep. That's like one of my 2025 goals is get more sleep. I think it's like, oh, grind. Yeah, it's like, I've been grinding for 5 years. I've been on this grind. You know, I've worked, 12 hours days for like every day for like 5 years. And 12 hours, by the way, is like 8 to 8, right? There's a lot of time on.
996.
996, yeah, exactly.
Let's go.
Everyone's like 996. I'm always a little bit skeptical if someone's like, oh, we work really, really, really hard, and they keep saying that. Like, is that actually true? Because what I've noticed the most about kind of hard work, and this is a totally different topic, but is like, it's sort of like organically compounds in a way. Like, starts compound in a way that it's almost like, let's say I could theoretically go from 80 hours and like double it to like working 160 hours. Like, nothing would actually happen. Like, because there's only so much you can do. Like, like I don't think actually then like output would double or something. I don't think so. It's just not as in CEO. There's so much leverage with the decisions you make that if you make a wrong decision, I mean, that's really bad. It's like kind of like Elon's thing where he talks about how you shouldn't kind of automate things that shouldn't exist. Great example of this. Where it's like,
good saying.
You have to get the decisions right. If you get the wrong decision and then you start like working 80 hours a week in that wrong decision, kind of moot point. Who cares? You're making something automated that shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
So
yeah, be productive and efficient with your time. Well, okay. How can people get in touch with you and get their own tests going on? How can we figure out if we're going to be schizophrenic or not?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. You can DM me, Twitter, Kian Sadeghi 5, mynucleus.com. Yeah, DM me any questions you have. I'm always happy to talk about genetics. I love it. People DM me all sorts of interesting questions, so feel free to DM me anything.
Awesome. Well, it was really great to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.